Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are playing as the Dark Elves against the Dwarves on the map Deadwood. And in this game I mostly just want to discuss this matchup in particular, discuss strategies that you can do as Dwarves to really deal with the Dark Elves, and as well as some strategies for the Dark Elves in dealing with Dwarves. My opponent in this game was new, he's said so in the chat and narrate. So don't give him wasn't trying to give him a hard time, not trying to gloat or anything here. Mostly just wanted to discuss the matchup and perhaps give some advice to any of you who might be sort of struggling with this. And I guess I'm kind of spoiling the result of this match here, but regardless, jumping straight in. For my composition, I did decide to bring good old Crone Hellebron. Not sure if she's the most competitive in this matchup, but I figured she could be fun. She does, of course, have her Cursed Blade. She's got the Amulet of Dark Fire. You might be surprised by this, but main reason I figured extra magic resistance could be good is because Rune of Wrath and Ruin is a pretty competitive pick in this matchup against your heavy infantry blobs. So I figured, you know what, that could be useful. That could definitely help out quite a good bit. Keep your eye troops alive. Fury of Cain, of course, providing that crazy buff. Heroic Killing Blow, Witch Brew, and then Gaze of Cain. So otherwise, we do have magic resist. We do have, of course, the crazy missile resist and a physical resist that's really high. Honestly, if my opponent had brought a bunch of, say, cannons to bring her down, we would be pretty tanky as long as these Blades of the Blood Queen stuck around. So my front line here, 3 units of Hargoneth Executioners, a single unit of Blades of the Blood Queen, some Bleak Swords out on the periphery to provide some screening against shooting and all that sort of stuff, as well as to soak up blasting charges and catapult shots, all that sort of goodness. We are backed by 2 Dark Shards here in the back. Dark Shards, of course, unshielded, will not last very long against Dwarven shooting, but I figured if my opponent brought gyrocopters, these guys would be a good counter, and also they'll do a good job against unshielded Dwarven infantry, which aren't the rarest sight in this matchup either. 2 Black Ark Corsairs, 1 on either end, are providing an additional screening unit, and we do have a Sorceress of Beasts hidden here in the trees. She does have the Amber Spear, which I'm very fond of in this matchup, as well as Wiston's Wild Form. So regardless, for my opponent's build, like I mentioned earlier, this was, as far as I'm aware, a new player. But he did decide to bring some gyrocopters. These guys, an odd choice. I personally don't think they're very good in this matchup. I don't really think they're good in very many matchups at all. They can provide some harass. They can definitely poke at single targets pretty effectively. But against the Dark Elves with lots of AP missiles, which often can be massed in this matchup, I don't think they do all that hot. And definitely they can be zoned out by, say, Harpies. And they don't really do that much damage overall, so I'm not a big fan of them, but we'll definitely see how they work out here. My opponent also did have the Goblobber, not a bad pick at all. It's already chipping away at my poor Hargoneth Executioners, where my opponent I would definitely be trying to focus out the Blades of the Blood Queen, but you know what, Hargoneth Executioners are still a meaty, expensive target. For my opponent's main army, he did hide it here in the trees. It is a bunch of Longbeards, always a good pick. These guys are very good at holding, so definitely not a bad decision there. The Peak Gate Guard, very elite sort of great weapon unit, same with the Grumbling Guard. So these two very competitive. I actually think the PK Guard will completely tear through Hargoneth Executioners. They might even be able to beat down the Blades of the Blood Queen. I'm not entirely sure, but I think they might be strong enough to do that. So definitely no pushovers. More Longbeards, a single unit of Bugman's Rangers, probably to zone off flyers or sort of poke at my own shooting. A Grumbrindle, and then 2 Runesmiths. These Runesmiths do have all of their, as far as I'm aware, all of their runes, as well as the Hammer of Karak-Draz. The Hammer is an immensely powerful. Rune of Elven Steel I don't think is very good in this matchup. I think because the Dark Elves have a lot of AP, it's almost guaranteed that most of their army is going to be AP. Regardless, you can see my opponent immediately hitting me with the Rune of Wrath and Ruin and the PK Guard over here on the flank. And honestly, the beginning of this match has been anything but fortuitous. I have managed to sneak my Lore of Beast caster over to the flank, which is nice, and I'm definitely kind of caught my opponent out in the open here. He hasn't really been put into position, but you can see we're going to try to get a little bit of a Amber Spear here, but it kind of whiffs. It clips the back of these Grumbling Guard and just flies off into oblivion. But we do get a nice little charge here on the flank. We're going to get a good wrap with the Hargoneth Executioners and start chopping these guys to bits. Unfortunately, here in the back, these Hargoneth Executioners do fall apart, and my opponent is able to sort of deal with that unit very quickly. However, can see good old Goblobber is being shut down here hard by the very angry Crone Hellebron. And although my opponent does get a nice round here on the Hargoneth Executioners, the Dark Shards are going to immediately punish the Peak Gate Guard. My opponent doesn't get his runes off immediately. I don't know if he didn't, or just he might have not have been paying attention. He has also forgotten about his gyrocopter. Once again, one of those new player. It's a new player, so it happens. These sort of mistakes do happen. I do get a Gaze of Cain over here, trying to wipe out these Longbeards quickly, get them out of the way. There are 2 units of them in there. so I can open up new paths. Over here, the Blackheart Corsairs as well as the Bleak Swords are pushing into the fray. We have dropped the Fury of Cain on these Harrigan Executioners, helping compensate a little bit for the Hammer character as. And we did get a nice little Amber Spear in there, which has racked up over 50 kills for our Sorcerer's Beast. That is such a potent spell against Dwarves. 10 out of 10 would recommend it. It's a really good one. Regardless, the Dark Shards are just annihilating these guys. You can see the PK guard falling apart. And of course, the Crone Hellebron, despite being hit by Flash Bomb, she has had Wiston's Wild Form cast, and she's just going to be doing a lot of hurt here. She does have that bonus versus infantry. She does have poison, so it's a very solid unit overall. In the meantime, in the backline, you can see the Goblobber crew getting overrun by Blackheart Corsairs. These Longbeards in full route, definitely wasting my Blades of Blood Queen here. They should be in here helping Crone Hellebron, but bit of a micro mistake on my part. Longbeards routed. Dark Shards are really still here. We do have these Hargoneth Executioners coming in from the flank, hitting these miners with blasting charges. They're going to be able to tear them to shreds pretty efficiently. And here in the pits, the only real threat at the moment is Crone Hellebron being sniped out by Grumbrindle and the Runesmith. So I definitely need to stay alive. My opponent does cast Grumbrindle, has no fear to keep his troops in the fight. Definitely not a bad move given the desperate situation. But unfortunately for him, PK guard is gone. Back here, the Sorcerer Beast is tying down the Bugman's Rangers. Now, she's not going to do great here at all. They're very good at defending themselves, and they could easily butcher her in the long term. But you know what? It's worth a shot just to tie them down, keep them from firing. In the meantime, over here, the Grudge Thrower getting slaughtered. It's not going to be able to stick around. My opponent does pull his Gyrocopter back into the fray, but really too little too late. You can see Crone Hellebron still around kicking. Some good meaty shots coming into the back of my troops there, but at this point it's turning into rapidly disintegrating into a bit of a massacre. The Dark Shards, of course, are just able to pick apart these Great Weapon troops who are unshielded. Despite the runes going down to defend its troops, really, against units like the Blades of the Blood Queen, even Grumbrindle won't hold up that well. Grumbrindle doesn't have the best melee defense to begin with as far as dwarves are concerned, and is just falling apart. So I did actually think the game was over at this point, and only then noticed that the Bowman's Rangers were still around and kicking, so we did have to go chase them off. You can see the Dark Shards shooting at the gyros there, but really these last few moments were basically just mop-up. So, as I said at the beginning of this game, my opponent was new as far as I'm aware. So, what I mostly wanted to discuss is how to deal with this matchup, how to approach this matchup if you're playing as a Dwarves. And perhaps a little bit from the Dark Elf perspective as well, but I think that this, if you're going from the Dark Elf perspective, it's pretty straightforward matchup. The reason I want to take this from the Dwarf matchup is because my opponent here was new, and I do think some players, and definitely quite a few players, struggle dealing with the two, the High Elves and the Dark Elves quite a bit when they play as Dwarves, because the Elves definitely have some serious advantages in this matchup. They definitely have something going for them. High Elves, I think, are an even worse matchup than the Dark Elves, because High Elves have healing, which makes them even tougher to kill. And Swordmasters, that's one of the few matchups where Swordmasters and White Lines being a mid-tier AP unit, is actually so useful in this matchup as well. But I think that's a whole other story. We'll discuss that in a bit. But dealing with Dark Elves, how do you do it as Dwarves? Going over the builds, of course, this build is sort of, I don't know if it's the most common build. Oftentimes you will see some cavalry. Personally, I'm not actually fond of bringing cavalry against Dwarves. I feel like it gets shut down fairly often, and not the greatest choice in my opinion, but this is a sort of build you'll see fairly often, or definitely a unit composition akin to this one is something you'll see pretty often. Hargoneth Executioners, of course, is a great unit. Oftentimes you'll see a lot of Dark Shards, sometimes you'll see Shades, definitely some AP shooting, and then usually some support units. Oftentimes you'll see Dark Riders. I don't think Crone Hellebron is the most common pick. You'll usually see like Malekith or Marathi, but regardless, it's a possibility. But you'll see a build usually similar to this one, usually with some cav in there rather than going with some more full on foot. But so how do you deal with it if you're as Dwarves? Well, I do think my opponent here was on sort of the right track. It's not all of this is, in my opinion, a bad composition or bad idea. Definitely the Goblobber can be very potent at chipping away at elite infantry. Grumbrindle, not a bad choice. He does have the snare with the flash bomb. He does do quite a bit of hurt on his own. He's still fairly tanky, just being a Dwarf Lord, even though he doesn't have the best melee defense. And yeah, he's just very solid. Now, the Runesmith's also a good pick, but you don't want to overinvest in their abilities, definitely. And then the main problem here, I think, is really the damage component for my opponent's army, which was centered on these Grumbling Guard and Gyrocopters, rather than a more shooting-heavy build. Going out of here real quick, and I do think my opponent made a definitely pretty solid effort here with the composition, so good job there. But really quickly, hopping over to a custom game. If we open up the good old stunties. What I would recommend in this matchup, as far as a lord choice actually goes, is actually a Rune Lord. It might seem odd, but you will often see the Dark Elves bring magic. Ever since they got Fate of Buna as well, it's a more common sight on the battlefield than ever before. So I find that the Rune Lord can be a very good choice. For two reasons. One, he does give you the Master of Wrath and Ruin, which is amazing at melting down the elite or Dark Elf infantry. Second of all, he does give you Master Unification, which is also very good. Third of all, he does provide Master of Grungni, as well as that magic resist. So very solid upgrades there. I think it makes them very, very competitive. I don't usually bother with Rune of Hearth and Home. I don't really think it's worth it on the Dwarves, especially because you want, in my opinion, a Longbeard front line. Also, no Forge Fire in this situation because, quite frankly, I'm not going to be going with I wouldn't go with a Great Weapon build against Dark Elves. If your opponent goes very shooting heavy, you're going to be completely screwed. Plus, the Dark Elf heavy infantry or Dark Elf executioners in particular are pretty strong, and nowadays Sisters of Slaughter actually trade really well with the Dawi infantry as well, so it's something to watch out for, and I think it makes AP infantry not as good. Definitely Master of Grungni, very solid choice in this matchup just for that plus 20% missile resist. If you want a Gatekeeper's Belt, maybe if you've got the points left over. For the rest of the composition, how do we go? I definitely think Longbeards are a must-have in this matchup. I think they will perform very well for you. They'll hold the line for long enough. They've got 48 melee defense, which won't hold perfectly against a bunch of executioners, but yeah, it'll give you the time. It'll give you what you need. It'll buy you enough time. As for supporting troops, what else should you bring? Let's say four Longbeards is what you decide to bring. Definitely, I would try to bring a Runesmith in here. Once again, drop Rune of Oath and Seal, drop Forge Fire, not worth it. Hammer of Cracked Dress, not necessarily a bad choice. I would say that's viable. You can definitely make it work. Goblobber, if you want to bring that, I think it's perfectly fine. Definitely not a bad choice. Which then leaves a few other things you want. You would definitely want Dragonback Slayers. Maybe you'll want Giant Slayers. Personally, I don't think they're that good in this matchup because well, they can be decent, but I think they're really costly for what they do. And honestly, you're probably going to get... if your opponent goes very heavy cav oriented, you're just going to have to zone them out with shooting, mostly. You're going to have to rely on your organ guns, which is what the next unit I would recommend here. Definitely one organ gun at least. Now, one of the things you will have to keep in mind is that if your opponent decides to bring bolt throwers, this artillery sort of setup could get counter-batteried. Which could be a little bit of a problem. I would bring 2 Bugman's Rangers just to provide some additional zoning tools. Probably decide to bring, say, some miners with blasting charges. Maybe just miners just to soak up charges because they're pretty fat and they can soak up charges pretty effectively. Definitely some Bugman's Rangers. Let's see, probably some Thunders, I think. You could double up on Thunders, do something like that, maybe drop a unit of Bugman's Rangers. That might give you just enough. If you cut the corners somewhere, you can always look. I've already cut most of my corners here. But definitely you'll want some Thunders. The good thing about Thunders is that they do still have shields, and they will still trade pretty effectively with most Dark Elf shooting. They're not ideal, but they'll do okay, especially if you've got your artillery focusing out the Dark Elf shooting. You can do something like this, and then you've got another 1,000 points left over, which can let you buy, say, another unit of Slayers. So not a bad composition here, I don't think. It can definitely put you in an okay position. Definitely a little artillery heavy, but yeah, we can't tech that up. I don't know where you want to put your chevrons at this point. It's really up to you guys. You can also just dump these Slayers or dump these miners and put in miners blasting charges. Really up to the player. But I think something like this is pretty competitive. You've got Slayers for your backline coverage. The Slayers can also deal with squishier Dark Elf infantry. They can run down shades. They can do stuff like that if needed. Thunders provide you with good defense or good shooting sort of protection. The Bugman's Rangers, if you don't feel comfortable with them, you can always just drop them and bring some Ulthar's Raiders, or you can drop them and bring some Thunders. You can bring a 3rd unit of Thunders. You do want some good AP to deal with those high-end AP troops, such as, most importantly, Harganth Executioners. And to an extent to deal with Sisters of Slaughter. Another option is, of course, to bring some Iron Drakes. Oftentimes you'll see people bash Iron Drakes. It's not good. In this situation, they can be okay. They can roast Sisters of Slaughter pretty well, and they'll actually, though they're not AP on paper, they'll do surprising amounts of damage to armored units that are blobbed up. They're definitely no pushovers. But personally, yeah, you can bring Bugman's Rangers, you can bring Thunders. Their fire will be good enough to crush enemy shooting, usually. they'll do well enough against enemy heavy infantry. You got your Slayers to protect your flanks. You've got some you've got your Runesmith and your Rune Lord to provide those buffs in the front line. You've got the Hammer of Kekdraz, which you can use to nuke down the stats on at least one unit, just to keep them from killing your Longbeard too quickly. And in the meantime, you can have all these guns firing away, doing lots of damage to your opponent. Definitely, you want the key here, if there is something to take from this, is the fact that you want your killing power to be wrapped up in. And see, look at that, it comes up to perfect 12,400. The main key here is that if you want your killing power against the Dark Elves wrapped up in shooting, with a lot of the new with a lot of the buffs to the Dark Elf roster as far as their killing power goes, and their sort of magical support and all that, and of course Hellebron and her upgrades and all that sort of stuff, you're in a much worse position as the Dawi to really fight them in melee. Plus, Darkshires are always a threat, so I think it's better to just focus on Thunderers, let Longbeards eat the fight at the front line, eat the charges. So regardless, good. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this sort of informative. I know it was a little ranty and definitely a little drawn out, but this was mainly what I wanted to discuss here. I just wanted to discuss the matchup more so than my opponent's gameplay or my gameplay in that last game. Perhaps give you guys some ideas or some tips. So I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it informative. I hope you found it entertaining. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below if you have not already, just to keep up with additional content. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, anything like that, be sure to share them, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye for now.